Welcome to Transcendent. I'm Raya, and I'm the daughter.
And I'm Joe, and I'm the dad.
Say, Dad, do you know what is the difference between death and taxes?
Well, I'm sure you're going to tell me.
Yes, I am. The biggest difference is that Congress doesn't meet every year to make death worse. Boy, politics are driving me nuts right now.
Yeah.
When I come over here to record this podcast, we watch a little bit of TV beforehand before we are having dinner together. And right now is the time of year where all we see are these political ads on. And I comment on them every time. I'm so angry because none of them are, here's this great politician. Every one of them is, the other guy is terrible. Politician A eats babies.
That's right.
And politician B throws their junk on neighbors' yards.
Well, sometimes they can't find something like that. So they say, did you know in 1943 he killed the neighbor's dog?
And yeah, do you know that 2.5 decades ago, politician C believed differently than politician C does now? Can you believe in 25 years they changed their mind? If they flip-flop then, what are they going to do now?
Exactly. So they think that somebody should, once they've made their mind up about something, it can't possibly be changed. If new information comes along, it doesn't matter.
No, and the heat has been turned up right now in our society so high because it wins elections. Politicians have figured out that if they are negative towards the other guy, that gets people to turn out. And I got to thinking, if that's going to change, it starts with us saying, enough, I'm not going to be swayed by that anymore. I'm not going to listen to the other people saying, that other politician on the other side of the aisle from me is really, really terrible.
So the way that you avoid that is to keep your TV turned off?
Well, right now it is.
Yeah.
But I do what many of the younger generations do. Then it means that I'm encountering it now on YouTube, or I encounter it online somewhere else. And so you can't escape it. It's always somewhere. But we need to be the ones that are reminding ourselves that we don't want that kind of negativity, and we have to counteract that ourselves.
I think one of the things we can do, however, yes, it is thrown at us and we see it, but some people seek it out. They want to follow the very, very conservative station, or they want to follow the very liberal station. And both of those stations are going to influence you or confirm what you think and add new information that isn't true.
I was surprised. I watched a video the other day that was looking at a lot of the people that had participated in the January 6th insurrection. And they were looking at what kind of people ended up participating. And they said overwhelmingly it was not people that were out in highly red areas. You know, red being the people that had voted Republican in the last election. It was largely affluent white men that were in predominantly blue areas, places that had mostly voted Democratic. And it was especially relevant in places where they were seeing a lot of immigration. And what they noticed as they looked at the kind of people that were drawn to participating is they were people that were feeling threatened by the changes in society. Oftentimes didn't know anybody from the people that are supposedly coming in and doing X or Y or all these terrible things, and we're feeling like things are being taken away from me.
Do you think that's also true on the other side?
I absolutely think it's true on the other side.
I mean, you just painted a picture of conservatives who that's the problem.
Well, and that has been my frustration here as well, is that I have been checking in to see how things are going with the new presidential race. And so I try to watch both sides, and I get frustrated equally on the other side. That I will watch things that are more in line with the left, and I think, well, that's not true either. Now, I do want to say that I don't think that that means that always right in the middle is exactly where we need to be. I think that issues really matter, and I think that there's a reason to have a real discussion. And obviously, I fall on one side of that discussion, but I'd like to have it be a real discussion and not paint the other guys as bad guys all the time.
In the politician's defense, I will say, and I know this to be true, there are organizations out there that go out and buy ads because they are supporting a particular politician, a particular candidate. So they put out things that they know are false. And the people that are supposed to benefit from that often don't want that on there, and they can't stop it. It is just very unusual that they could be allowed to put out all these things that aren't true.
Where the politician themselves says, stop saying these negative things about my opponent.
Correct.
And they can't stop it because it's not them running the ad.
That's correct.
Oh, yeah.
And that's very frustrating for both sides.
I remember at one point thinking, you know, if you ever drive through a town late at night, say on a Friday night, you drive through, especially in the Midwest, and you see the small town bars that are open, they always have the neon signs that are out. Come in and drink this kind of beer or that kind of beer or this kind of alcohol, or we've got that thing. There's always the signs saying, look at how cool it is in here. Look at how fun it is in here. And that's really what advertising is it's saying, look at how, look at this and putting that message. But we never have advertising for the things that we really want in our lives. I wish that there was somebody advertising saying, let's see the good in one another. Let's be thankful for one another. Let's be thankful for the unity that we have. But there's no elections to be won by doing the right thing. That doesn't get people to turn out to the voting box to say, isn't it great that we all want what's best for our country? That gets people to sit at home and, well, I guess it doesn't really matter. We all want what's great, so what does it matter what I vote for? They figured out that we get influenced when they make fun of the other guy and put terrible things out there. And so I noticed as we were talking about all these things, I have kind of a unique perspective in that I have sat on both sides of some of these issues. And especially as we bring this back to the topic of our podcast, LGBTQ issues, I have sat on both sides of this issue. I lived my life thinking for a long, long time that I was a straight, cisgender man. Because I thought, I'm not like those weird people out there that are transgender. Until I realized, I think I am. And then I transitioned and realized, a lot of what I thought beforehand, both about myself, but also about issues that affect the world, I was really wrong on. But I also find people that are in the LGBTQ plus community that then look and say, all of those people out there that have never experienced the world the way that we do, none of them understand and they're completely wrong and they all just want the worst and, whatever it gets said. And I think, well, that's not how it is either.
Well, I will tell you, each of us is the hero of our own story. Don't you think that's true?
Yes. And it's easy to forget that because When we tell ourselves our own story, we want to craft a villain. And so that other person out there must be the villain. What a terrible person they are. Now, that's not to say that there's no bad actors. But if you took the time to get to know their own story from their perspective, you would see the world differently. You would see how they view themselves as a hero. And the things that they do and the choices that they're making that you think the only reason they could be doing that is because they're out here to hurt people like me.
Right. And the problem with that is when you say those things, you are using words that really will just create more conflict. When you say you're out there to hurt me, I think, aren't we better off instead to emphasize words that look like more common ground? Or if we do have to express something, instead of arguing with the other person, instead of accusing the other person, better that you put it on yourself. So I say, I feel like that when you say something like that hurts me because that's not how I feel. And sometimes that can create a much better dialogue.
Yes. So when we focus on these are my feelings in this, and this is how I'm going, rather than you did such and such. And one thing that I do want to temper that with a little bit is it's sometimes easy to ignore when we have an obligation to do that for others. As somebody that has lived on both sides of that divide, I never thought about the way that people were marginalized in our society before I transitioned. I don't want to say I never did, but rarely. It was not on my radar a whole lot.
Mm-hmm.
But once I transitioned and realized, wow, life is not so good when you're part of the marginalized group. Life is a lot harder. And I had no idea how hard it was. And I wish I could go back and tell myself, hey, be a little more cognizant of how things are for the other people. Because folks in the LGBTQ plus community, we're very aware of it. We've experienced it lots of times in this place and that place. And we've had a lot of people saying to us, hey, can you not worry about your own feelings a little bit? And we take that to heart. I don't want to say that that's never true. Lots of times it is true. And we take that to heart. We're very aware of it. Not to say that everybody's perfect. But oftentimes we miss it on the other side when, before I transitioned, I never thought about, because I was rarely confronted with times where I needed to look at myself and realize, am I painting somebody else as the villain that's really being marginalized? Am I the villain in somebody else's story that I haven't thought about?
I can identify with that. When I was young, I lived for 2 years in Japan. This was back in the 60s. And I lived in the northern island that was it was unusual to see people, foreigners there. But when you did see them there, they clearly stuck out.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
And I stuck out. And I was a minority. And I was treated like a minority. I get that now. But before that, I thought a lot differently about minorities than I do now, because I am one when I go over there.
Sure.
It's dramatically different. And that probably was one of the most valuable educations I got. 2 years living as a minority makes you understand how a minority feels.
I had a professor when I was at seminary that told the story about how when he was growing up, he was the son of missionaries, and they were stationed in Japan, and they were serving in a local church there. And he told the whole class, he said, when you're talking about religious freedoms, if you've only lived as the majority culture, it's easy to assume that we need more of our faith put onto society. But when you've lived as the minority faith, then freedom of religion looks a lot different to you. And we need to be very aware of how we feel and how this all works together. And I had never thought about that before. That was the first time I encountered somebody putting it quite that black and white for me. And I realized, oh, yeah, that really matters a lot.
It certainly does. I thought you were going to tell a different story. When you were in college, I can remember you told me the story that you walked into the classroom one day and you were wearing a fur cap. And the professor said an animal died so you could wear that cap.
I think he was making a joke.
And you said, and another one died so I can have lunch.
I did not say that. You said I should have said that. I love how the story changes to what you want it to be.
I'm Chuck Reynolds, and I started listening to Transcendent because Joe is my friend. I keep listening because I have friends, colleagues, and family members who are part of the LGBTQ community, and I want to better understand their struggles and perspectives. I have become a supporter because I believe Joe and Raya are truly helping to preserve relationships and save lives. Join me in supporting Transcendent. Just go to transcendent.com, click on support, and select the amount you'd like to give each month. It can be as little as $3, and you can cancel at any time.
Another thing that we all have in common as we're trying to reduce the temperature that we have in our society right now is coming back to the idea that we all have some shared values.
Absolutely. We all want good health. That's a shared value.
We all want peace.
Yes.
We want economic security.
Correct.
We want our society to be good.
Mm-hmm.
None of us is thinking, you know what I really want to do is I want to destroy this society. And yet, if you hear the political rhetoric that we have, those people on the other side, you know what they do? They're all frogmen.
Yeah, that's right.
and they all just want to come in and destroy everything that we have here. Nobody is wanting to do that. Now, and that's not to say that. I shouldn't say nobody wants to. There are bad actors. But anytime we find ourselves assuming that every single person on the other side of the aisle from us is a bad actor just by virtue of the fact that they're on the other side of the aisle, we probably need to temper that.
A lot of the things are things that we agree on the ultimate goal with both sides. It's just, how do we reach it? And that's where a lot of times the disagreement comes in. But we can start by saying we agree on the ultimate goal. The ultimate goal is we want everybody to be able to have a job that wants one. But, there aren't enough jobs out there and we're going to have to do it this way. No. We got to do it this other way. So there is the disagreement. But the ultimate goal is something we agree on. That interesting, isn't it?
There was a book that came out back in 2012 called The Righteous Mind by Jonathan Haidt. And he pointed something out. This was the first time I've ever heard somebody talk about this. He is a social science researcher, an American social psychologist and author. And he studied the way that conservatives and liberals view society. And he discovered that we actually have very similar values, especially two in particular, that we all have values of compassion and values of fairness. But what he discovered is that among more conservatives, they had some additional values that they were adding in. Values like loyalty, values like authority, and values like sanctity. And all of those are things that help to keep societies on the right track, unless they stifle the wrong people and then they start to be bad. But when you don't have those things, you can end up losing important pieces of the culture. And he talked about how there is this give and take back and forth. But if we don't recognize the values that other people have, we can easily see them as violating our own values.
What about on the other side?
Well, we all have compassion and fairness, but he said generally among more liberally minded people, that's the only two values that we hold. And we're not looking so much at the loyalty, authority, and sanctity values. Whereas among conservative folks, we're looking at really that package of all five things together. So putting much more value on loyalty, value on authority, and value on sanctity, and understanding that there's a sense of, well, that's violating how we've always done things. And is that really a wise thing? And on any given issue, that may not be a wise thing, or it may be the wisest thing that we can do. There's nothing inherent about holding that value or not holding that value that makes it right or not right. But each individual issue is one that we need to approach. And so, for instance, when it comes to values like, what do we do with the government? Well, I hope that we would be submitting to the government because the government is what keeps us safe. In theory, it should be. That's what we want in a perfect world. On the other hand, if we ever get to the point where the government is saying it's illegal to be gay, it's illegal to be who you are, which thankfully it's not, right? And that's not the kind of society that we live in.
It is in some countries.
But it is in some countries. And so that's where there's times where we need to look and say, just because that's how we've always done things doesn't mean that's how it should be right now. And a liberal mindset is always going to be saying, let's re-examine how we've always done things and see, is there a better way to do things that are more compassionate and more fair? And the more conservative way of looking at it is going to be saying, yeah, I understand. I want compassion and I want fairness, but let's just not throw out all the old things just because it's old. Let's make sure that we value what has gone before us, because we stand on the shoulders of giants. And we want to make sure that we honor what has come before us as well.
Part of the problem is the fact that there is so much misinformation out there. And the misinformation is often what guides people. They follow the misinformation because it will confirm their belief. So the misinformation just makes things more explosive in so many areas. That's true, for example, especially with our podcast, with the LGBTQ areas. The misinformation out there is dramatic and amazing. And people actually buy into things that have many times been proven not to be true. For example, people think that because people are LGBTQ, they're much more likely to be pedophiles. Absolutely not.
Right. And they throw that out there as if it's true.
Yeah, as if it's true. Exactly. Where's your statistics? There aren't any.
They want it to be true, or they don't want it to be true, but they want to imagine that it's true.
Yes, and that's sad. And we have misinformation about so many things. On the other hand, you're talking about going back to the old ways and the way it was. There still is, and I know this for a fact, there still is an organization out there called the Flat Earth Society. And those people do believe, honestly, sincerely, that the earth is flat. It's not round.
Believe it or not, it's actually gotten more so in the internet age.
Yeah.
As it has been able to take that ignorance and the misinformation and spread it out a lot more. So rather than combating it, when we have access to way more information, it's actually made it even more so.
And I actually have a friend who I've always thought was relatively intelligent, who is a flat earther. And he is not going to accept any of the things out there that say that it hasn't happened. I remember when I was in college, there was a big poster in one of the windows in the dorm that everybody could see as you were walking from class to class. And it was, I don't remember the exact wording on it. There were just a few words. But the whole idea of a man landing on the moon, no, that never happened. They sincerely believed that was all staged. It was an act.
Right. In all of those conspiracy theories, they get this idea that somehow all of these people that would be involved in the conspiracy somehow were completely silent and had an airtight story with all of them together. And they just happened to break the case themselves. If there were that many people involved in it, believe me, for anybody that has ever tried to run an organization, you would not be able to keep a conspiracy together like that. You wouldn't be able to keep a story that airtight.
It would be likely if two people know something, it would be likely to get out. If three people know of a conspiracy, it's almost guaranteed. And we're talking three people. So take something that would involve millions of people of some kind of a conspiracy theory. Someone would talk. I'm guarantee someone would talk. But people will still go on believing that the earth is flat.
You and I did an episode about this that I highly encourage you to listen to if you have not listened to it. Back on April 28th, called How to Fight Confirmation Bias. And I think a few of our listeners dropped off on that one because they thought, I don't know, that one doesn't sound that interesting. And I understand it. They confirmed to themselves, they looked at it and thought, yeah, I don't need to know that one. I don't have that.
Right.
And that's what we all do. We talked about that. It's actually one of our more interesting episodes with a title that I think maybe didn't connect with as many people. But if you didn't listen to it, there's some interesting stuff in there that we talked about, the ways that our brains are hardwired to view information incorrectly, to confirm what we already thought was true, and to ignore information that we already didn't want to believe was true.
Part of the reason for that is that we have freedom of speech. So we can say whatever we want. And I'm grateful for the fact that we have freedom of speech.
So grateful. I remember, what's the classic thing? I don't agree with what you're saying, but I would die fighting for your right to be able to say it.
Right.
I would give my life for your right to be able to say it.
Now, some people, especially now when we're talking about politics, think, oh, you shouldn't say that. Well, we have freedom of speech, and I agree with you. I would protect that.
Right. But of course, freedom of speech does not mean freedom from consequences.
Of course not.
So you'll sometimes hear people that will say, oh, I'm just out here speaking my mind, and people are coming and saying that I should not be saying those kinds of things, and look at how they're trying to take away my freedom of speech. No, they have freedom of speech too. So we can disagree. This is civil society. You have the freedom to say what you think, and they have the freedom to say that they think you're wrong. We all have that freedom of speech. And the fact that people are disagreeing with you, or the fact that you have consequences, that people don't like what you're saying, people think you're a mean person for saying what you said, well, you don't have freedom from consequences. And we can't control anyone else. All we can do is look to ourselves.
Yes.
And see, what can we do to make sure that we're not falling into this and creating more of the problems? What can we do so that we're not buying into these negative political ads? What can we do so that we make sure that we're producing peace and understanding and acceptance towards one another?
I think each of us has a responsibility to try to tone it down.
Yeah.
To try to make it more civil.
Yeah.
And I think that's important for us to do.
And that is exactly the kind of world where we want to be.
Exactly.
And the kind of world where I want to be is one where I get to listen to this podcast every single Monday morning. And we're grateful to have you here, coming back week after week as we try to be your voice of positivity. Where can we make one another's lives better and more fun to live?
And with that, we'll see you Monday.